All right, modern European history. I'm going to try and make a few videos over the next few days that might help give you guys a few pointers before we get to the nitty gritty. Um, some of them will be about test day strategies, etc. Some of them will be about kind of the nuts and bolts of DBQs. This one will be one of those nuts and bolts things. The DBQ that you took, and honestly, I have not graded them. I haven't even looked at them. You guys turned them in, and today, a lot of stuff was going on. Did not get around to grading them. I'm going to knock those all out tomorrow. I thought about starting this video by playing the Doors, The End. Then I thought that's really creepy. Um, quoting it in your instructions was creepy enough, probably. But it is. It's the last DBQ we're going to do, guys. That's why I labeled it the Omega. I know we've crammed a lot of DBQs, and it's been just a torrent of comments and critiques. But I figured, this is the test, right? So if you're wondering, I gave you documents from the 2012 DBQ. So I was teaching modern European history back then. And I keep saying to you guys, it was a different animal. It was a different beast. It was a different animal. All right, guys, if you're curious, this was our rubric. You had a 6-point rubric, base point, right? So you had to have a thesis, use a majority of the documents, and there were like 12. So you had to use at least 7. You had to show that you understood a majority, support the thesis. You had to show bias or point of view in 3. And then there was you had to have groupings, right? Which is a part that was terrible. Yeah, you think bias was bad. The grouping part. Basically, you had to make a 5-paragraph essay, basically, right? Because you had to have 3 groups, and it just makes sense that you'll discuss groups as paragraphs. And then if you wanted to get a perfect score, right? If you want to get the other 3 points to get a 9, so you get 6 points for the base, and you got to get all 6 to get any of these 3 points. Okay. Um, there were a lot of ways you could find bias in an additional document, change over time, outside info. Like, if you're curious, I told my guys that your easiest ways to earn points were to find another bias, to do the whole change over time, related to a different time period, and add a bunch of outside information. Now we're going to go over just a few things they talk about. I could show you student samples. That would not be very productive since they were writing for a very different rubric, a totally different rubric. I realize that you all have a rubric different than the one that they've used the last few years, but as you can see, their rubric is very different than yours. So you would get student essays that don't worry about context, that have a lot of focus on these groupings and stuff that you guys don't have to worry about. And so it's not very helpful to show you the student essays outside of maybe showing you, thesis and maybe how they use the documents. But even then, that's not really that helpful in my opinion, because of the context of when they were writing, how they were writing it. So I am going to go through, though, very quickly a few things. And as you can see, I took document 1, Thomas Malthus, and then I jumped down to the London Workingmen, document 4. And if you remember, you also did Louis Blanc, document 7, John Stuart Mill, who was document 10, and your document 5 was actually the final document, document 12. So I put them in roughly chronological order because the essay was chronological, really. But as you can see, I picked and chose. The essay, the prompt, if you remember, the question was to analyze the various arguments that emerged over the course of the 19th century about how to improve the lives of European workers. So, again, I haven't looked at what you all wrote, okay? But I do know that we've been having trouble on and off with this point of view bias, right? We called it point of view back then, right? Now we've gotten to where on the current rubric, they are calling for you to, and I quote, to earn this point, the response must explain how or why, rather than simply identify the document's point of view, purpose, historical situation, or audience is relevant to an argument about the prompt for each of the documents sourced. basically you have to explain the nuance of the document, right? You have to identify if the document is clearly biased, if it has reliability issues. You have to identify if this is one of those things that, it's a government publication supporting a government program. Surprise, surprise. One of those deals, right? We called it bias or point of view back then. We've gotten away from that terminology, but it's the same concept. Okay. And so I know that we've struggled with that. Everybody has from time to time. It is one of the hardest aspects of DBQ. Oh, wait. I also want to tell you really quickly, for those of you who might be freaking out about your DBQ scores, okay? And I'm sure everybody saw my email about what I'm doing with DBQ scores. If you are curious, okay, the DBQ in 2012, how did the children do? I'm sorry. Don't tell me I deleted it. I accidentally clicked a button. And I think I got rid of what I wanted. The average score, I can tell you because I remembered it, but I wanted to show you in print, was a 4.9. So in 2012, the average AP score was on the DBQ, out of a 9-point DBQ, was less than a 5. Okay? So if you guys have been getting, let's just say you've been getting a lot of 5s from me, right? And you're bummed. Calm down. A 5 might pass, okay? In a world where we had a 9-point DBQ, a 5 was above average. And remember, average passes on the AP test, right? Because you got a 5-point grading system, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You think about it, at least half the children have to be 3, 4, or 5, right? So if you can get just a little bit above average, you're going to be okay. And so if you're getting 6s on my DBQ practice, I think you're going to pass. Call me crazy, but I'm pretty certain a 6 is going to be a passing grade. So don't dismay. In 2012, children were scoring, and by the way, the DBQ was a massive part of the grade, more than it is now. It was actually a larger part of your AP grade than it is now. And kids were still only scoring, a 4.9 or whatever it was. But I wanted to go through really quickly. So examples of acceptable point of view analysis. And here's one that you guys used, right? You guys had to do the London Working Men's Association petition to Parliament. Here's a way you could point out the point of view. And I'm going to read it. The Working Men's Association, made up of members of the class most afflicted by the government's apathy, experienced firsthand the problems caused by a lack of representation. You are directly calling out the fact that the authors of this document have, skin in the game, so to speak, that they are the victims of the very issue that they are writing about. Now, I know some of you are like, I don't know, I would write they're biased because, fine, write that. No one's going to take off points if you just use the word bias, okay? Reliability. Right, you guys had to use the document from Louis Blanc. That was your third document. And it even said, Louis Blanc, French political leader, right? It calls out. But the fact that Louis Blanc is a French political leader where the workers were more inclined to demand equality and betterment of living standards indicates that he may have inevitably chosen to cater to their needs and gain their support and bring stability to France. You're calling out the fact that guy's a politician and you can't be sure if this is to gain votes, right, or if it's legit. And on our current DBQ rubric, purpose is one of the things you can point to. You could say that this document is just an attempt to basically win over voters. That would work. Now, you can't just say it that bluntly. You've got to work in the nuance of he's a French politician. He's in a country where the workers are well known for their political involvement, right? All those revolutions we studied. So that would be acceptable. And there are other ones up here, but I feel like it's silly for me to talk about examples that you guys can't relate to since you didn't have the documents. The different kinds of documents serve purposes. Again, purpose. a petition to Parliament by the London Workingmen's Association hoped to gain approval. So you could point out that somebody was writing a document for a very specific legal purpose or cultural purpose or whatever. And I know some of you might be saying at first glance, who cares? You're the people at AP don't want you to necessarily tell me why that is important, but the people at AP want you to show that you understand it is important. You might not fully appreciate the importance, but you understand that there's something about that. Okay? Um, I have a theory that one of the reasons why AP, has continued to cling to this, especially in the modern day, not that 2012 wasn't modern, but as we keep going, I think my students lack the understanding of the reliability of a source, right? Taking it with a grain of salt. And of course, every one of you from my class is currently laughing because you guys are all like, yeah, we learned all about that firsthand last year. But, it's true. People need to take a moment to look at, what is this? Where is it coming from? Who is producing the document? Can we take this as the word of God, so to speak? Or, scripture, or do we have to take it with a grain of salt? And so by pointing out it is a petition to Parliament, that gives the document legitimacy, doesn't it? Right? Reliability. Because you don't just submit documents to a government agency willy-nilly, full of lies, etc. Right? Um, the tone of the document. Louis Blanc proclaims passionately that strong government intervention should undermine laissez-faire policies and thus achieve. And so, again, that is nuanced, but pointing to the tone of a document is something that AP will accept. Okay. Now, here I think are the ones that are good for me to show you. Okay. And I will probably find a way to get this to you without sending you the whole document and making you wade through it all. But you can't just say, well, these people are workers. Okay, they're workers. Why? Okay, there's a difference between just saying they are workers and saying they are workers who are the ones who are suffering from the effects of this government policy, right? There's a huge difference from just saying they're workers and they're biased to they are workers and this is what they are experiencing and that might color what they are doing, right? I'm going to say, does that make sense? And none of you can answer me because I'm making a YouTube. But I hope that makes sense. The source is biased as Blanc is a political leader and is most likely a conservative as he is pushing for an idea of increased government control. You're identifying Louis Blanc as a conservative. You don't know that Louis Blanc is a conservative. Louis Blanc, first of all, was not a conservative. He was a liberal. This is a mistake that gets made all the time, and I have a few kids in the AP American class that I've had to kind of to tell them that, like, look, I see where you're going. I see what you're trying to do. You're wrong. Like you're just wrong. You had the right idea, wrong information. So it's not acceptable. You can't just attach bias where it is, where it doesn't exist, right? You can't make bias. So just calling somebody out or trying to make it fit is not going to work. You guys did not use Mr. Ricardo, but he was the second document. I am going to point to this one, Mr. Ricardo, Principles of Political Economy and Taxation. Basically, Ricardo he's famous for the iron law of wages, if you remember us talking about him, right? But here you go. If you were talking about Ricardo's work was published in a book and can be considered reliable, and he's really educated. Are you kidding me? Right? There are a lot of books. It doesn't guarantee, that it's reliable or accurate, right? And so just remember when doing point of view. And here's my general rule of thumb. Don't just tell me who a person is. Tell me who a person is and why that equals bias. Right? Explain it. I have been saying this over and over and over again in your critiques, in my feedback. Explain it. Describe it. Expand upon it. I've used all sorts of synonyms. But what I'm getting at is you can't just go, they're workers, so you know they're biased. No, you don't, right? You don't know that. Why should we think it is biased, right? Why should we think these workers are biased? What would make these workers biased, right? Um, he's a politician. All right. What about that? You know, are you just saying all politicians are liars? You can't say that, right? And so there are different ways that you can present that tone, that bias, that historical perspective or historical context point. That is not something we really had back in 2012 as a way to earn points. But that whole context where you establish the time period in which the person was speaking and why the events around them might have colored what they were writing or affected what they were writing or might explain why they wrote what they wrote, something like that. It is a tricky point, but it is 2 points on your all's AP test. This is 2 points, right? And for a few of you who I know are going to try and do the 2 doc gambit or a 3 doc gambit, where you, instead of going all 5, you're going to focus on 2, maybe 3 documents, and you're going to try and earn every point under the planet or under the sun, that you can get out of those 2 documents. You got to get this point of viewpoint, right? And so we've really got to establish this skill, because honestly, you need this. It's 2 of the 10 points on your all's test coming up in about a week. So if it's still not clear, please reach out to me. I'm going to grade these essays, like I said, and give you feedback, and hopefully, we've all improved and we've gotten the skill a little more down. But if it's still eluding you, or there are places where you think you did it and I didn't give you credit, and you don't understand why I didn't give you credit, again, please reach out to me, because we've got to get this down pat, right? We can't just let 20% of our grade run away from us without a fight.